Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and it is the 29th of October, and we are so close to the end here. We can taste it. What a great month it's been. This is the Connected Cafe. This is the small and modest audience, live audience, but gosh, these have been great conversations. I almost want to package them up and do something with them. They've just been stunning. Last night was to die for. Anyway, so glad to have Scott McLeod here. Keith Krueger is on his way. Scott, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Thanks so much, Scott, for taking the time. Yeah, it's really worth listening to Jane Nelson and Susie, who have so much in common. And Jane with decades of the positive discipline parenting books and the philosophical, pedagogical background that was just so great to hear without really any mention of the technology. And it leads to some great kind of conversations about the interplay of the technology with the pedagogy. There's so much to do this month. Ed Connector, please feel free to join. I know there's a contest going on right now. I don't have any idea where the book clubs are, but there's something surely going on. We do have a badge code for tonight, so if you can wait till the last slide, you will get credit. If you watch the recording, you can actually find the slide quickly as well. And then we have one more, let's see. Yeah, we have one more night of the Connected Cafe. And then it's Adam Bello and Richard Byrne tomorrow night. So much fun. So this is a chance for our group here to indicate where they're participating from. You know the drill. Look to the star. Look to the left of the map for the star. Click on that star. And then click on the map. Phoenix. I'm in North Carolina. Oh, there's Keith. Okay, Keith is back. Let's see how he does. Keith, are you hearing us? Hooray! If you click on that microphone, the talk button, we should be able to hear you now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, terrific.
Great.
Are you
Sorry
on
about that.
DC?
I am.
Okay, good. We were just talking about what a great series of conversations these have been. We're losing out on the battle for attention in the evenings, but the recorded sessions as a whole have been brilliant, and I cannot wait to figure out what to do with these, because it's been like little drops of pearls of wisdom that turn into torrential rainstorms. It's really been fun. Okay, so here's how this works. I'm going to ask each of you to give us a 3 to 5 minute background on yourself. Sort of what has brought you to where you are today. You know, we're going to dive into the things that you're really passionate about a little bit later, but just kind of an overview of your roots, the things that you've worked on that have led you to where you are. And Keith, okay to start with you?
Sure. I grew up in a family of educators. My father was a principal, and my sister is a counselor, and my sister-in-law is a special ed teacher, and my brother was brother-in-law is a deputy superintendent. So we had a lot of education. But my interest was in policy. I went off to Washington, worked on Capitol Hill, and became interested in the mid-1980s in telecommunications policy, and spent a number of years working on those battles, and realized that what I was really interested in was how to use those new possibilities for education and healthcare and libraries, and so started working in building coalitions, and in the 1990s COSIN was created, and I started working with them, which was, 18 years ago. They're 21 years old, so I didn't start it, but been at it for a long time. So I'm passionate about how do we use these new possibilities to really reimagine learning.
I had no idea, number one, about the family background, but about the library connection. Have you done anything with that in the period of time since you've been with COSIN?
Well, actually it overlapped quite a bit. In my background, my first clients, well, I started an association management firm, which what that means is they run nonprofits. And we ran the Friends of the National Library of Medicine, which is the world's largest medical library. We ran it for the National Agricultural Library, and we started a couple for the Library of Congress, the law library there, and the library for the physically handicapped. And so I've learned a lot from keeping my foot, or at least having initially my foot, in the library world and in the healthcare world. And I think there's a lot to be learned in healthcare. Privacy is an area that's kind of imploding in our area of education, but has been a major issue for confidentiality and privacy in the medical area for years. And so there's a lot, I think, of cross-pollinization and learning from each other that needs to happen.
Keith, I was recently at a media specialist conference, but largely librarian related. And it was very interesting to me to sort of see the inherent tension between the ways in which libraries have traditionally protected the privacy of the library users, right? You don't publish the list of overdue books because you don't want to show what books people are checking out. You're very sort of consciously aware of the need for privacy, intellectual privacy. But at the same time, hearing messages like, if you do it on the internet, it is not private. So don't even think about it being private. How do we kind of balance the need for privacy with the degree to which the internet is really an open platform?
I think this whole area of privacy and is kind of the sleeper issue, which has awakened in the last 6 months. I think that depending on how you describe the issue, and I may not be precisely answering the question that you are, but let me try it. For instance, if I say, I think it ties into this issue of big data, and I don't think it necessarily is related to whether it's on the web or not. It's an issue of, so if you say to parents or the public, would you like your educational system more personalized so that kids can move at their own pace? I think you'd get a widespread agreement on it. If you say we're going to use these large amounts of data and government is going to hold it, you're going to have a lot more people concerned about it. So how exactly do we balance those ability to personalize instruction in an area that you're only able to do if you capture data and feed it and use it?
So there is a distinction, though, between data that we agree to be captured and data that we don't. Like, I'm willing to let Amazon capture my data in order for there to be a tangible return, right? But I have made that agreement. Students aren't going to be fully aware of the degree to which they may need privacy for intellectual freedom. So how would we figure that out even?
I think it's a huge issue, and I think there's what we might allow ourselves to do outside of school may be different than what we would expect with minors, clearly, certainly around commercial use. And I think that what's interesting, the issue of commercial in schools has been around for a long time, since TV ads and things like that. But what we're increasingly seeing are free, quote unquote, applications and solutions, and you don't always know why they're free. And if you look behind it, it's because they're mining your data and selling it for some other purpose. And so that's a challenge, I think, if you really want to be complying with FERPA we're actually, we meaning COSIN, are looking at building a toolkit around helping school leaders think about privacy. We're partnering with the Berkman Center at Harvard, and I think a lot of these issues are very, very challenging, and very few people have even begun to think about them.
I'm interested in do you know, were you a fan of Edwards Deming?
Yeah, yes.
So Deming was sort of interesting, right? He did the red bead experiment. He showed how often data was collected and it was misunderstood. And until you push the data down to the people who would actually benefit from figuring out the data, it was very tempting to have it be misread. So one of the things that worries me about Common Core is this aggregation of data around students, which then would somehow box them in. Do you have a better understanding of Common Core than I do, and the degree to which sort of data could potentially make it hard for a student to reboot?
I'm not sure if I have a better idea than you do, but you know, I think my interest or my philosophy around data is that one of the biggest potential opportunities with data is to provide a much more formative feedback loop to the learner. And we think about a lot of this data, the school, you know, I'm not sure that the most important consumer is, in fact, the feedback loop to the learner, just like it is to the consumer. And the challenge is all the other people that see that. And you know, how do we protect that? But I'm not sure that a lot of the immediate feedback, we're not talking about high stakes tests. I'm talking about, just like in a gaming environment, constant feedback to tell you where you are and where you need to improve.
Keith, you and I have another connection here. It's the Open Technologies work I did for you when I was in your employ at COSIN. And you know what's so funny to me is that Richard Stallman was actually talking about this many years ago, but you're right, it's been sort of a sleeper issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been on, if we polled our chief technology officers for the last 10 years, privacy would probably be on the list of top 10, or certainly security would be. But it's never been in the top 5, and I think suddenly it has leapfrogged into the top issues.
Interesting.
And clearly the things that are happening on the front page of the newspaper regarding national security, but also in the education space, the sort of launch or implosion of the In Bloom and the controversy, as you said, around Common Core and tying it to this concern around big data. So actually at the COSIN conference next March, we're going to have Governor Bob Weiss, a former governor who heads up the Alliance for Excellent Education, doing a town hall debate with Young Zhao, because they have different, I think they have different perspectives on the use and opportunity or potential for abuse around data.
It breaks my heart that I don't work for anybody right now who would pay my way to COSIN. It breaks my heart.
Well, we'll get you there one way or another.
Okay, so let's do the same with Scott. Scott, can you give us the 3 to 5 minute overview? And you're welcome to turn your webcam on if you would like, but you don't have to. And we're not hearing your mic, Scott, if your mic is on. It doesn't look like it's on. Okay, we're seeing video off and on.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Okay. Does that work?
Hooray!
Woo! All right, great. You can tell I'm casual at home. Oh, my background. Okay, so I grew up in the Fairfax County, DC suburbs. Taught 8th grade social studies at a housing project school in Charlotte, North Carolina. went back and got my doctorate in law degree at the University of Iowa, and then headed off on the road to be a school leadership professor, preparing principals and superintendents. Ended up at the University of Minnesota, thus the shirt, and got this humongous federal grant to create the first graduate program that was designed to prepare tech-savvy school leaders. That's where I started connecting with Keith, actually. So COSA was a really important and vital supporter of our efforts early on. That program and our work morphed into a national center called CASTLE, which is the only academic center in the country focused on the tech needs of school leaders. And we define that broadly. It's not really tool training. It's more how do you create tech-rich learning environments for students and staff. Have been head of CASTLE since 2005. Keith and I have been dialoguing the whole time. Steve, you and I have too. Somewhere there I started blogging around 2007 at Dangerously Irrelevant, started tweeting, hopped universities a couple of times, and basically just kind of live in the tech leadership space, right? So it's kind of a nice niche to carve out. Most people are not really focused on principals and superintendents and what they need to know about this tech-rich environment. So we've got a lot of work to do because, as our mantra says, if the leaders don't get it, it doesn't happen. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
We've been desperate to have you participate in our School Leadership Summit. So I'm going to send you another email reminder because we have a date in March and we'd love to have you be a part of it. Okay, so you and Keith are both looking at this from the leadership perspective. Over the past 30 days, or close to 30 days, we've had some really interesting discussions about when technology drives pedagogy and when the pedagogy should drive technology use. Will Richardson made the case that this is a completely new phenomenon, networked learning, and so the technology should really describe new pedagogies. Jim Benaitis from HP said the technology should magnify the existing good pedagogical practices. Pat, where do you kind of land on this spectrum? And I'm going to have to ask you to turn your mic up just a little because it was hard to hear you.
I think that technology should always be driven by learning goals. But that said, we have to recognize the transformative and amplification potential of technology. So, but I think if we don't start with learning goals first, then it always runs this very grave risk of tech for tech's sake, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and we do see examples of that, don't we, where there are big rollouts that just don't work?
Right. Well, and I think we see a whole lot of tech rollouts in schools and districts everywhere that are driven by the tools, right? Like we're going to, they sort of have this mindset that they're going to provide digital tools for purposes of equity and learning and so on. But their thinking and their planning isn't very deep, right? And when you actually look at what they do, they're actually doing things that are counter to the goals that they say they're trying to achieve.
Interesting. Keith, do you and do COSIN and CASTLE have a formal relationship of any kind?
I think we do. We at least were initial partners, and I think we still are.
Spoken like a true head of a nonprofit. I'm sure somewhere it's happening, right?
Well, I think when Scott goes to get his next bag of money, he always lists us as a partner.
Okay.
Probably fair.
Scott, in terms of numbers, right? I mean, what kind of numbers do we talk about when we talk about school leaders versus teachers?
Well, I mean, we have millions of teachers in this country. In America alone, we have about 125,000 schools, public and private, and about 14,500 school districts, many of which have multiple central office administrators. So you're looking at least 140,000, 200,000, 250,000 administrators that need help. Now, that's dwarfed by the millions of teachers, of course, right? But nonetheless, because the leaders are in control of all of the factors that impact systemic change, they're really pivotal people to focus on. right? So you can focus all the money and attention and training and energy you want on teachers and students. The bottom line is, within school organizations, they have very little power and authority, which means that if you want systems to change, and I do, then you have to focus on the people who are in charge of the systems, and those are those formal leadership positions like principal and superintendent, right? And they're the ones that control money and time and personnel allocation and professional development and vision and all those other things that lead to systemic change.
So I did an interview over a year ago with Paul Kimmelman on the school leadership triangle. And as I remember, his point was that school leaders kind of bear all of this weight of expectations that aren't really related to learning on top of them, and they have to kind of carve out the space culturally within their district or schools to provide a buffer to the teachers. Is that an accurate description of school leaders who do a good job, or is it richer than that?
I think that's one component of effective leadership. I think that buffering is absolutely critical. You look at a lot of the policy demands that are hammering school systems right now, and many of them run very counter to the kind of rich, engaging, empowering, tech-infused learning spaces that many of us are advocating for and that those administrators are trying to achieve. Right, so the only way to make that happen internally is to do everything you can as a superintendent and principal to buffer those outside forces and prevent them from infiltrating and getting in the way of the kind of really important transformative work that they're trying to do inside their systems.
This question is for both of you. We'll start with Keith. And there is a point at which at 8 o'clock, if Tom DeBoer is in the room, and Tom DeBoer is in the room, but Tom's going to give us an update on what's going on tomorrow. So we'll break at 8 o'clock for that. But both Keith and Scott, we've talked about the parallel in these interviews between the student's learning experience and the teacher's learning experience. And if we want students to be more self-directed and have some sense of agency in their education, that we have to have teachers who feel the same ability to learn through self-directed means and to have some form of agency in their own jobs. That's pretty hard. Does it get even harder up at the leadership level?
Well, I think it does, and I think everyone's got to see themselves as a learner, and they have to. We just returned from a delegation we took over to Portugal, and I think what you do see in places where there's been sort of an empowerment throughout, in really the whole ecosystem, and I think that's what you want, is a system where everyone wants to continuously improve and learn, and that is certainly the goal, I think, and in high-performing situations, the most, you'll see whether it's superintendents or principals or heads of technology or whatever, everyone is part of the learning fabric, and they see that's their job, and they want to empower other people to do that.
I would add that one advantage that administrators generally have that teachers don't is they have a lot more control over their time, right, and also schedule, right? So they have time and schedule autonomy and flexibility, which gives them at least a fighting chance in many ways, whereas educators who are in the classroom on a day-to-day basis don't necessarily have that luxury.
So, Scott, you're saying that leaders actually have more flexibility?
Than a classroom teacher? Absolutely.
Gotcha. So interesting. Keith, did you say you were in Portugal?
We were. We took a delegation of 20 folks. COSIN does this every year. We go somewhere where we think they're doing interesting things and to see how they're handling investments in ICT in education. And Portugal is a great example because since 2007, they've had a major national investment. Every child gets a device. They've provided connectivity. It was really part of a digital economy strategy. It wasn't an education strategy per se, or education technology initiative. It was how do we get our economy, how do we get everybody there? And in fact, they're now ranked as the #1 country in terms of e-government in Europe.
Ranked #1 in regards to what?
Well, it's a whole e-government. So, for instance, the devices go home with the parents, but the only way you can file taxes in Portugal is online. The way you can start a new business in 48 hours in Portugal, the fastest in Europe. So there are a variety of different partners and metrics because of the investment that they made in schools. And we saw the same thing in Uruguay. There it was more of a digital inclusion strategy. It was a way to get families connected through all kinds of different ways. And so the device was provided to the students, but it went home and it had connectivity with it.
So, I sit in a little tiny space, right, and I see a limited vision. Portugal and Uruguay have not been on my radar at all.
Right.
How come? Am I the only one missing them? Or are they
I think it's surprising.
Hidden gems you found.
Yeah, well, I think that I don't know if you read Tom Friedman's book 2 years ago, That Used to Be Us. I think the U.S. used to be known as the place to look for big, bold innovation. And frankly, if we're looking around the world in a whole variety of fields, but particularly in education and education technology, there are a lot of countries, whether it's Portugal or Uruguay or Singapore, there are all kinds of places that surprise you in terms of their interest and investment, and not particularly affluent countries. The interesting thing about Portugal is they have maintained the program after the government switched from being a socialist. The Socialist Party started the program. It's been continued under the coalition conservative government. So we were very interested in that, and coming from Washington right after our government deadlock or lockdown or shutdown of the government, it was interesting to go to a place where the conversation, that's not to say that there are many parties in Portugal and they disagree on lots of things, but in terms of education and investment and making kids college, career, and life ready, they felt that that was important enough to continue even with the change of the government.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break here. Thank you both. Hold on tight because it will only be a couple of minutes. Tom, are you ready to give us a report on tomorrow?
I sure am. Hey, Keith and Scott. So, gosh, we're really sort of ending with a flourish here with a lot of things going on. Today was a big day, and tomorrow looks like it's just as big, if not bigger. Starts at sort of the notable events on the calendar. The first one actually involves Keith, actually. 1 p.m. Eastern Time, the Consortium for School Networking and Market Data Retrieval will be sharing the results of their survey of school district leaders on the E-rate, broadband, and education networks that they've conducted for the FCC, and I'm really eager to see what some of those results are, and I'm sure many others will be as well. At 2 o'clock, we've got the debut for this year of the American School Counselor Association, working with TCOL, which I know, Steve, you worked with on a number of occasions in the past, on a Leading Digitally webinar. At 3 o'clock, we have the debut of Learning Forward professional development leaders doing a webinar on data analysis for continuous school improvement. And that's featuring an author, Victoria Bernhard. So they've got somebody fairly high-powered lined up to lead that webinar. At 4 o'clock, we've got the debut of the National Associations of State Boards of Education, and then webinar along with the Alliance for Excellence in Education on leveraging connected educators to implement the Common Core, which is a really interesting topic. We've been talking about connected education all month, and Common Core, of course, comes up every day in events. And so the real question is, well, what can connected education and connected educators, what do we bring to the table in terms of helping to implement the Common Core? So I think that's going to be a fairly interesting session as well. Pearson makes its debut at 5 o'clock on with EdWeb on a webinar called Charting Student Aspirations, the Discovery Phase. In the evening, we have the last of the very successful Connected Principles chats that have involved NAESP, NASSP, and Connected Principles. That chat will be Principal's Choice. It's an open topic. The first three have been fairly well defined and have gotten a lot of traction among principals and other administrators, and we'll see how that goes. AFT and TESS continue their Common Core Confident series, which has been very popular. I think for the first one they had more than 900 registrations for it, a lot of which they said was due to CEM and our efforts, which was very gratifying to hear. Charlotte Danielson, who is an internationally recognized expert, will be talking tomorrow night about revisions to the framework for teaching and how those intersect with the Common Core. And I think also I'd be remiss without mentioning that we've got some things sort of centrally going on tomorrow. Tomorrow and the 31st. We're hoping that everybody will go online and post your reflections about the month. Use the C13 hashtag and link out to reflections you have about the month, what you learned from it, how you're going to apply the knowledge, new connections you've made, how it's influenced your thinking and the content you've gotten. And we're giving away prizes, 5 prize baskets tomorrow and 5 prize baskets again on the 31st, which are a pretty nice set of things: books, software, games, pre-release games. In the case of we have pre-release copies of SimCity Edu, which is the first of the Institute for Play's groundbreaking collaboration with electronic arts and sort of adding education to entertainment titles like SimCity. We have pre-release copies that will be part of every prize basket. And also the Ed Connector Challenge is going on for the next 2 days, which is an event where basically we're asking folks to go out and use Ed Connector and find 3 people you share interests with, 3 people who you can help, and 3 people who need your help, and report back that you've made those connections. That's 9 connections in total, and you'll be eligible for another nice prize basket, which will consist of all 4 books in the CEM book clubs, which were held in Ed Connector and are still going on in Ed Connector now. And I guess the last thing I would say is that from 5 to 6:30 we'll have the first of our 2 formal what we've learned sessions that are centrally programmed. We'll be talking about personalized learning, 21st century classroom management, and let's see, I think connection to collaboration is the 3rd of the themes that we're going to be talking about, what we got out of the month, bringing together the theme collaborators and a lot of special guests, and also giving you sort of an update on the stats and sort of trends that we saw during the month, and what we can do together to move forward after this month, because we do not want this to be the end. We want it to be the beginning of bigger things to come in November and beyond. So that's my update. Any questions, we'd be happy to take them.
Okay, I think we all want to know how the Arnie Duncan chat went last night.
Well, it was crazy. I was in there for a little while. My understanding is there were 1,400 participants in that Twitter chat. So I think we all did a pretty good job of getting the word out. I have not heard, how Secretary Duncan felt about it, but he certainly got a lot of input from a lot of folks out there, including probably some people in this room right now, about what we need to do to move forward with connected education. I thought it was a really great turnout. I think we really showed Secretary Duncan how important connected education is to a lot of very bright, very influential people in education, and I think it was very good for the cause that turnout happened, and we were excited about it.
Tom, thanks as always.
No problem. I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the conversation.
Oh, you're a good man. Okay, so Scott, you put in the chat there, you were one of them on the Twitter chat. You told him that being a connected educator meant 2-way, not 1-way communication. I'm going to guess that it was probably unlikely he saw that specific tweet if there were like 40 a minute or something going on. So have we reached, Scott, an interesting plateau in our technology, right? So we have all of these online education programs. I held 800 webinars myself last year, right, through the different conferences. You've got Twitter chats that have 101 pages of recorded information. Oh, is there something for us to learn about reaching that limit?
I don't think we've reached any limit. I think that we're still at the tip of the iceberg, right? Because most people, and that includes most educators, aren't yet actively involved in social media at least for professional dialogue and learning purposes. They might be, for home or family or social purposes. Which means that there are huge waves still coming, right? And if those of us who have been in this space for a long time are feeling overwhelmed by the number of channels that are possible to learn and interact in, and the amount of content that's in any one of those channels, right? What's going to happen when the next wave of adopters comes in, and the next wave? I mean, they're going to feel even more overwhelmed. And so I think it really speaks to the need for curation and for guidance and for trusted voices in ways that we haven't even probably evolved yet.
Interesting. Okay, Keith, you're welcome to answer that same question, but I'm going to give you kind of a head start here. We're going to do the passion drill down. So this is something that you're really thinking about deeply. It could be long-term thinking. It could be something that's just sort of come on your radar. It could be your trip. But this is a chance for you to kind of tell us what's top of mind for you and that you really care about right now.
I think we're obviously, given what's going on in Washington around the E-rate, we're thinking a lot about what is the infrastructure that's needed in order to enable the kind of digital learning that's possible now. And while there's a lot of talk about, there's certainly any number of districts that are moving along on one-to-one, and I saw Scott's posting in the chat box about how many Iowa districts are now doing one-to-one. But when we actually look at the network, that are very few school districts are really ready for a one-to-one environment. And even if they're ready, if they think they're ready today, they're not ready tomorrow because the kind of bandwidth and whatever. So, I mean, I think it's a huge problem given the lack of sophistication that we have in our networks, the slim staffing, and the new survey that we just did really highlighted that it isn't just a matter of bringing a fat pipe to the door, but every piece along the way is a problem. The internal connections, the backbone, the wireless are all contributing to the inability to really leverage these for really powerful learning environments. So that's one issue that we're working on. I already mentioned the privacy, so I won't mention that again.
That's so interesting. And you're not even talking about pedagogy here. You're just talking about the technical infrastructure.
Just the basic infrastructure. And clearly, I'm not saying that you should lead with the technology, but we're not going to get to powerful pedagogy, even if you have it, if we don't have the basic plumbing in order to run the stuff. And of course, the biggest impediment to effective use of technology, I think, is people. It's having the vision and leadership, and that's at the core of what COSIN's about, and probably every other professional association is, how do you help people see the possibilities of what's next? So, it's pretty easy to fix that's not to say there aren't technical problems. I give kind of a keynote speech called "The Big Hairy Problems Keeping Us from Using Effective Technology," and certainly ubiquity and access is a big problem. But frankly, it's been solved in places like Portugal and Uruguay. The bigger, hairier problem is us. It's having the vision and leadership and reconstituting the resources we have and creating new partnerships and understanding what learning really looks like. So
Keith, I'm really interested in your description of Portugal because I heard echoes of Finland there, and I'll tell you the echo for me. The echo was a cultural consensus around an issue, right? And in both cases, it wasn't necessarily education. In Finland, it was around equity. In Portugal, it was around economic development. And somehow that story was powerful enough to get everybody on board agreeing together. Will we find that story here?
I think if we don't find it, and I actually think there's a common unifying theme, whether you're talking about Korea, Singapore, Finland, Uruguay, or Portugal, and that is they're all about preparing a better economy, and education is seen as the way to get to a better economy. And I think that's universal, and it's almost shocking and appalling to people from around the world that we don't have that conversation going in the United States. We've gone through the last 3 presidential campaigns with almost nothing said about education. The last time there was in 2000, where Bush ran on a campaign that he knew what to do about education, which resulted in No Child Left Behind. Since then, it hasn't been on the national conversation.
Keith, that's so interesting. Is it part of our kind of American heritage of the frontier mentality and not planning and kind of getting to a crisis and then catching up?
I think there's not an imperative. While there is frustration writ large about education, everyone likes their local school. There's not an imperative that we have to do things differently. I'm just reading the new book, Smartest Kids in the World, and I have to say I'm only about a third of the way through, but it's fascinating where the reporter from Time magazine follows 3 exchange students, one to Finland, one to Korea, and one to Poland. And they're living a year overseas after having lived through the education system. And I think her main thesis and finding is the good news is that the kids really can learn, that systems can get better, and you have to make choices, and so I'm fascinated and only halfway through that, so I can't give a full book report.
So interesting. Okay, thank you, Keith. We'll come back. But Scott, what's on your mind? What's top of mind for you? What are you really thinking deeply about?
Keith, as I mentioned in the chatter, I get to live in these policy circles that I can only dream of quite often. I'm involved much more in sort of day-to-day practice of leaders and teachers and kids in classrooms. I guess what I'm thinking really deeply about is sort of this combination of how do we make powerful and empowering technology-rich learning environments and happen in schools for kids and staff. And how do we also help legislators and policymakers understand what that looks like and why it's desirable instead of some of the directions that we're currently going, right? So I think about some of the educational environments that Amanda Ripley talks about in The Smartest Kids in the World, right? And, I don't want my kids, and I don't think we want our kids immersed in sort of the crazy test prep environment of Korean high schools, right? I just don't think we do. And all of the, supplemental education that happens afterwards and so on. We have this different kind of conception about well-rounded education and so on. So, I think there's some dangers when we look to other countries or we implement some of these policy models. Keith mentioned sort of big data and adaptive learning also. And, Justin Reich has talked a lot about what's our vision of personalized learning. And one vision, this goes all the way back to Seymour Papert, of course, is personalized learning is where the computer runs the kid through his or her paces, right? And the computer dictates the agenda and what's to be learned and when and how, and the best the student can do is maybe alter the pace a little bit, right? And so we have a lot of discussion about the power of adaptive learning, and we have rich foundations and governments talking about, oh, we can personalize learning, right? But it's really, again, the computer controlling the kid. And then we have others of us who have sort of the opposite view of personalized learning, where the computer and the internet are powerful devices to enable students to pursue passions and interests, to be powerful learners and connectors and creators and doers and thinkers, right, where the kid is putting the computer through its paces rather than the other way around. And, how do we shift policy discussions from the former to the latter? How do we shift school spaces from the former to the latter, right? We have all these adaptive learning systems coming into schools. We have big, huge urban districts buying individual technologies for students, but their vision is limited to them as test prep and sort of drill and kill devices, right? Or curriculum delivery devices are basically fancy electronic textbooks and so on. So that's sort of the big stuff that I'm thinking about right now and trying to work on. And I think the challenge is that we have this conception still of education as a transmission model where the students are going to sit passively and receive. And what these technologies allow us to do is they allow us to give kids wings and turn them loose if we so choose. And that's really the dynamic that I'm trying to live in right now and make happen. And so there's policy issues around that, but mostly what I'm focused on is around how do we make that happen in schools and classrooms.
Okay, I love being a moderator. So we've asked this question several times over the last 2 weeks. So Scott, I live in a community. I can go to a farmer's market. I can go to a grocery store. I can prepare my own food. I can go to a restaurant. I have a wide variety of choices with regard to something that's sort of fundamental to my health. And it is provided primarily by a free market system. And then there are people who kind of make up the slack. Why do we have a hard time seeing education in the same way that we see food? Is it because they are different, or we've just gotten used to certain ways of delivery?
I think it depends on whether or not you buy into Horace Mann's idea of a common school, right? I mean, none of those other places have the function of socializing youth to become active democratic citizens, right? So we're already seeing narrowcasting in terms of information channels that we listen to. We go to churches with like-minded people. We live in neighborhoods with like-minded people. That's what the book The Big Sort tells us. We listen to only the websites and TV channels and blogs and so on that reinforce our own mindsets. Where is the place where we all come together and learn how to live together and work together and govern together and run our society together? Essentially, we're running out of places, and the only place left really is our school. And so you look at sort of the privatization or free market model of schooling, right? And it has a very inglorious past, as it has been used for over a century now. Those kind of mechanisms to resegregate or segregate or resegregate ourselves from others, right? And I think that's the danger of that kind of model, is that unlike other areas where you can pick and choose things that are good to your health, if we allow our schools to become such a private continuum and such a choice continuum that we're not mixing and intermingling and learning together, then we're going to go back to the days of segregation, right? In this case, it will not only be racial or ethnic, but it will also be socioeconomic and ideological and other fronts. And I think that's sort of the challenge with these new free choice mechanisms.
So this is so interesting to me. Keith, we tell stories of a society during the American Revolutionary War and the building of the Constitution where there were very high literacy rates and there was very sophisticated discussion in the public media about what was going on. Do you think Scott is right? Do you think that the schools have to provide this function, or could we rethink them in a different? Could we rethink the learning model in a way that didn't produce the kind of echo chambers that Scott fears?
Well, I like Scott, believe that public education is at the heart of a democracy, if that's your question. Now, that said, I think there's a lot of different ways to deliver public education, and that can be look very different than what education currently looks like in most classrooms, where we have a factory model where there's 30 kids or so and a teacher, and in a building that's only used for 7 hours a day or whatever. And but I share Scott's concern when we implode that model and go to totally I think what we want to do is engage. I don't necessarily think that competition inherently leads to the greatest learning. I think that what we want to do is create engaged learners and robust or engaging environments. And I don't think that is necessarily inherently by for-profit companies. That's not to preclude that option, but I think that there is a societal value in having public education, and I would agree with Scott in that.
And I'm not trying to represent a side other than for the purpose of exploring an idea, but I don't feel that way about the grocery store or the farmer's market or the Thai restaurant I go to. I don't feel like that's competition or a commercial market in a negative way. Scott, you raised your hand because I think you want to say something.
Not yet. I'm waiting for you to finish.
Oh, I'm just riffing here. And it's interesting. Okay, so Scott, when would be a time in our history when we would look to public schooling and say it really fulfilled this function of bolstering our democracy? Do we have a period of time where we can kind of say this is what public education has done?
Sure. I think we've been living it since Horace Mann, right? And I think what we see is we keep peeling back the layers of the onion. So, you mentioned the revolutionary time when people were all involved in, citizenship and governance concerns and so on. But, of course, that was a very small elite that were involved in those conversations, and your average person basically was, not involved in the same way, right? I think, we have this idea in America that all kids deserve opportunity, right? And then that's rooted in the idea of a common school. And to the extent that we allow haves and have-nots in our schools, and technology is exacerbating that, those are real challenges for us, right? So I put in the chat area that just like we're seeing economic inequality increasing, we're also seeing educational inequality increasing, and whether we like it or not, and of course I'm a big fan of technology, the technology is exacerbating that.
See, the surprising thing, I think, if you look at the PISA data, and Scott may or may not like international comparisons, but there are a lot of other countries who are much more equitable. In fact, the U.S. has a huge equity issue in terms of our educational systems. And countries, just to our north, Canada does a much better job than we do. Why is that? I mean, it isn't, and I'm not. You can hold constant the diversity, and yet the commitment to equity just doesn't seem to work in the U.S.
So we had some recent research to come out that talked about sort of the digital equity concerns, and sort of gets that back around to what I was saying before, right, is that basically we know that affluent kids get to do things in school with technology, and poor kids have things done to them by technology. And the sad part about the research that came out this past year was that they ask the same kind of questions that they did 20 years ago, and the needle hasn't moved hardly a bit. Right? Like we still see poor kids being subject to drill and kill remedial type activities with technology in much greater percentages than their more affluent student peers. Right? And so for those of us who care about, you know, students of color and students in poverty and other traditionally underserved student populations, that's a big deal, right? And how do we keep technology from widening those gaps rather than closing them?
Keith, I love the example of Canada because it seems as though with so many similarities, my outside non-research view would be that they actually came up with a better story, right? Wasn't it a story of trust in the teachers?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think that's definitely what you see in Finland. And the Finland story is very different from the Korea story, but the Finland story is all about, 40 years ago saying, they were at the bottom of the heap in terms, or the lower third of nations, and they wanted to build their economy, and they felt that the way to do that was by education, and they were going to do that by trusting their teachers. And I think that is the same in Canada and the same in New Zealand, and there are other examples around the world.
Oh, I love these conversations. So darn fun. Keith and Scott, I think we're going to close at this point. Thank you both so much for coming. It was really a pleasure to spend time with both of you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks,
always
Scott.
Fun, Steve. Thanks, Keith. Great to hear your voice. Someday the Castle-Cosin partnership will benefit you in some way. I don't know how, but I'll keep
when they comes along.
It always benefits us if you're doing good things, Scott.
Thanks, Keith.
Okay, thanks everybody. That was really a blast. Tomorrow night, our last cafe with Richard Byrne and Adam Bello. Have a great night. We're going to turn off the recording. You do need to exit the room for that recording to process. Take care. Bye now.